I'm doing something wrong. Good afternoon, everybody. Just waiting a couple of quick minutes before we get started. Just so you all know, I am going to be recording this as well. So we'll get started. I'm going to wait just literally like 1 minute, maybe two, because I know you all have other things to do and have busy schedules. So I don't want to hold you. I'm going to wait just a couple minutes and then we're going to get started. Thanks. All right. Thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon or this morning for Embrace HR, How to Grow from One to We. This is a very quick 30-minute live lunch and learn webinar where I wanted to share some information with you as we all are in the process of growing our businesses. I thought that it was very important to talk about something that many people don't talk about that I've found as a business owner in HR, just in terms of how we grow our business, and many workshops that you will go to and conferences that you will attend. We'll talk a lot about how to grow your business from a marketing perspective, how to grow your business in terms of how to be engaged with government clients or large corporations, social media, how to engage people with social media, how to network. But there aren't a lot of workshops and conferences that really talk about what you need to know, the very basics you need to know in terms of how to grow your business from an HR perspective. And so I developed this webinar for that purpose, to kind of talk about that a little bit, so that you can build your business from all aspects, from the ground up, with a solid foundation. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about human resources and how to grow from one to we. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a little bit about me as your host. My name is Stephanie Lomax. I'm the president and CEO of HR Pro for You, which is an HR consulting firm where we help businesses grow from one to we. We help them know before they grow, and we help them to build a solid HR foundation so that as they begin to add employees, as they begin to offer benefits, as they start to run into employee relations challenges, they're able to handle that with ease and have a foundation that is set so that as they grow, their foundation can grow with them. And so I'm excited about it. Some of my core competencies in terms of HR have been dealing with HR audits and compliance, assisting with performance management, developing those programs, conducting compensation and benchmark studies, job description development, policy development, employee handbooks. And I've really served in all of my roles over the 18 years that I've been in business as a corporate advisor to the C-suite, and a trusted advisor to the C-suite to help them kind of navigate through these human resource challenges. I also developed the 7-point methodology of Embrace HR, and we're going to talk about what that is today and how that can help you in your businesses as you start to grow into not just you, but really thinking of more of a we mentality. Just to give you a little bit of background, a further background, some of the clients that I've supported have been construction industry, IT government contracting, nonprofit, other types of government contracting. And I also have partnerships with other HR firms, as well as vendors and strategic partners that assist with putting together really a full suite of HR assistance to help companies as they encounter various challenges or have various needs. And that's everything from, as I mentioned, performance management, benefits administration, training, recruiting is another arm in terms of strategic partnership that our firm offers. And we recently have become a provider for background checks, pre-employment drug screenings, motor vehicle record checks, and DOT physicals as well. So we really are expanding our reach to really be able to provide our clients and our customers with everything they need under one umbrella. So in addition to listening and writing notes today, it would be great if you would share some of the information that you're learning about Embrace HR from one to we. And you can use, you can tag me, which is that first thing there at HR _pro for you. You can also use the hashtags Embrace HR, hashtag one to we, and hashtag know before you grow. So if you're hearing things that are making sense to you, I hope that they do. And if you are hearing things that you want to share because you know other business owners that are in the process of growing their business, please feel free to share that information out by using these hashtags so we can have some engagement there on social media as well. All right. So here's one thing that I can guarantee you. As a business owner myself, hiring can be scary. Being a business owner in general can be very scary. Employers often feel very much at risk, and there are several reasons why that is. Mainly, when you think about bringing someone into your business, what you've spent time building, you've spent money building, effort, it's your dream, it's your baby, having someone to come into that entity and having to expose your business to someone else so that they can assist you is very risky, and it's also very scary. But equally as scary is not having staff in place. It's equally as risky because you won't be able to serve your clients in the best possible way. And not knowing how to properly hire those staff members is also very risky. And the biggest reason why it is extremely risky when you don't hire properly is because small businesses are at a higher risk of being sued by employees. Well, why is that? Because most employers that are small don't have formal policies, they don't have formal procedures, they don't have formal documentation, they don't have these things in place. And the minute that something goes wrong, or the minute that something goes awry and an issue arises, an employee is likely to use our justice system to solve that problem. And so it's always extremely important to understand how to properly hire individuals, because not knowing how to do that is extremely risky. But there is some comfort that you are not alone. There are plenty of other businesses out here that have done what you're trying to do. And so finding other businesses so that you don't have to feel like you're reinventing the wheel, and engaging with an HR expert that can help you properly hire, help you properly vet the staff that you're going to hire, and put those individuals in place that are going to help you grow your business is extremely important. And so we're going to talk about some of that and how to go about doing that today. Where are you most at risk as an employer? There are these are three of the most common mistakes that employers make when they begin to hire employees and staff into their businesses. First is wage and hour violations and overtime violations. What I mean by that is not properly calculating how to pay overtime. The law says, and this is straight from the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, overtime is paid on 40 hours worked in a work week, whatever your deemed work week is, and it's paid at time and a half. So it's 40 hours over the course of your work week, and it's paid at time and a half. There really is no getting around that. That's what the law says. So if you have an employee that is eligible to receive overtime, which is a non-exempt employee, then you are required to pay them overtime in the course 40 hours, if they work more than 40 hours over the course of a work week. For example, if an employee works 37 hours Monday through Thursday, and then they work 7 hours on Friday, then they would be eligible for 40 hours of straight time and then 4 hours of overtime because they worked a total of 44 hours in that work week. Okay? So just remember, rule of thumb, overtime is calculated on 40 hours, over 40 hours in a work week, and it's paid at time and a half. The next most common mistake is discrimination. Hiring, firing, training, and promotion discrimination. I would venture to say that the majority of the time, these things happen inadvertently. They're not intended to. However, it does happen, and unfortunately, there are companies that do discriminate when they're hiring, firing, and training, and they're promoting individuals. So there are some laws to protect the employee and the candidates against discrimination, of course, in hiring and firing, as well as training and promotions, and we'll talk about one of those. And then also misclassification of employees as the third most common mistake. How do you classify your employees? Do you have them as exempt, which means they're not eligible to receive overtime? Or do you have them as non-exempt, which means that they are eligible to receive overtime? The next piece of misclassification that often happens is bringing on staff, classifying them as a 1099 or a contractor when they really are a W-2 employee. And we're going to spend the majority of the time talking about that because as a new company or as a company that has few employees, this is where we see the most violations occur. It's one of the most common. It's the most frequently violated, and it's just because, again, not knowing how to properly hire, you say, oh, well, they're only working part-time, so I'm going to make them a 1099 contractor. That might not be the correct process, so we're going to talk about how to identify that. How much do these most common mistakes cost? Well, you would actually be very surprised. 75% of employer lawsuits involve employee disputes, which means that companies are being sued the majority of the time by things that go wrong in their organization with their employees. That's a huge number. 40% of those are against the smaller employers. And I'd mentioned earlier, the reason why smaller employers are more at risk and are more likely to unknowingly violate these laws is because they have not spent the time researching and understanding or engaging an expert in human resources as to how they need to have policies in place, which policies they need to have in place, how to implement and execute those policies, etc. So this is the reason why smaller employers are a larger target. The average award to employees that goes to lawsuit, $218,000. Now, I don't know about you, but it may be a most common mistake, but it's also a very common and costly mistake. And so we want to make sure that we are not making these kinds of mistakes because $218,000 could be door closing for some businesses, quite honestly, and it has been for some businesses. So we want to make sure we have a strategy in place and a process and a plan in place to make sure that we avoid this at all costs. So I mentioned a little earlier, a couple slides back, that we're going to talk about 1099 versus W-2s. And the reason being is because most employers, when they first start hiring people into their business, they automatically want to make them a 1099 for a variety of reasons. I think mainly because they think part-time somehow equates to 1099, and that's not the case necessarily. So let's talk about how you make the distinction between a 1099 and a W-2. A 1099 employee, in order to determine whether they are 1099 or W-2, you want to look at the degree of control and independence that you have and the staff member has. And the IRS uses these three categories to make this determination. Number one, behavioral. How much control of when and how do they have over completing their work? Are they reporting in and having to fill out status reports? Are they having to do it on site? Where are they doing the work? That's a behavioral characteristic. The second characteristic is financial. How are they being compensated? What types of tools and supplies are they being given? Are they being reimbursed or not reimbursed for expenses, and how are those expenses being reimbursed? And then thirdly is the type of relationship. Do you have a contract in place, or are you offering them some type of employee style benefit that may muddy the water or gray the area of whether they are a contractor or a W-2 employee? Here are the things you need to know. A 1099 contractor does not have regular work hours. What I mean by that is they don't come into the office every day from 10 to 2, or Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10 to 2. Generally, that makes the area a little bit gray as to whether or not they are a contractor or a W-2. A contractor, 1099 contractor, does not generally use employer-issued equipment or software. Now, software may be a little bit different because they are able to access that. There's a lot of cloud-based software, and so consultants may be able to go in and run reports, pull information, and be useful from that standpoint in terms of software, but they definitely are not likely using employer-issued equipment. They usually have their own laptop or their own computer. They have their own cell phone. They're not using any type of employer-issued things that other company employees would have access to. They don't get paid through a company payroll. Now, what I mean by that is, and I actually had someone ask this question in a workshop a couple months ago, which is a really great question. If you have one payroll company that is doing your processing your payroll, you can set your payroll up so that you have subcontractors and you have employees. And your accountant or your bookkeeper, whoever's processing your payroll, can set that up. So they're not being paid through the company payroll that the employees are being paid through. They're set up as a contractor in the company payroll because you're just running through it for accounting purposes to keep track of how you're paying them. But they're not actually on company payroll. They don't receive employer-sponsored benefits. They cannot be enrolled in your health care. They cannot be enrolled in a flexible spending account. They cannot be provided with bonuses. They cannot receive, well, I won't say gifts because I guess technically you could give gifts, but employer-sponsored benefits. They can't participate in the 401k. They can't receive any type of pension benefits. Anything that is an employer-sponsored plan, a 1099 contractor is not eligible to participate in. If they're participating in it, they're an employee, and we need to make that adjustment. A contractor does not have any form of employment agreement. They have a independent contractor agreement, and it needs to say that, or subcontractor agreement. It needs to be clearly stated on that document that they are an independent consultant, an independent contractor. It's going to explain how they get paid, the process in which they get paid, and will explain that they do not have any guarantee of benefits. They're not eligible to participate in any company-sponsored benefits. All that information needs to be included in the contract agreement or the independent consultant agreement. And probably most importantly, They must have the ability to perform work off-site and support either their other clients or their other businesses. If they don't have other businesses or clients, maybe you're their first one. That's great, but they need to have the ability to perform the work off-site. What I mean by that is, for example, I have a client that's in Michigan. They hired an accounting clerk as a contractor, but this person reported into the office Monday through Thursday, and they worked 32 hours in the course of a week. They're an employee. They were accessing payroll. They were running reports in payroll. She was filling out timesheets. Definitely an employee. So she wasn't able, even if she was a contractor, the inability to be able to perform the work off-site, accessing the client's software, reporting her time, and not being able to do anything else outside of the work week definitely classified her as an employee. Part-time, but an employee. All right. So let's talk about the money, the cost of an honest mistake. If you are found to have violated the wage and hour misclassification of 1099 versus W-2, here's what you're likely to pay. You're going to pay 1.5% of the wages that you paid to the employee. That's a penalty. So if you paid them $10,000, 1.5% of that is going to be a penalty. Plus, you're going to pay into Social Security and Medicare tax because you were not paying their share of it, which is 20%. And then you're going to pay 100% of your share of the Social Security and Medicare tax. So if you've done this 2 or 3 or 4 times over, and you've done it for 6 months, 9 months, a year, now we're talking pretty hefty fines and dollars that you're going to have to pay out in order to remedy that mistake. So you always want to run through the test, make sure that you are classifying them properly in terms of whether they're 1099 or contractor. You want to make sure if they are exempt versus non-exempt. You want to make sure that you have them properly set up to receive overtime and calculate that overtime properly, because having to correct that is really, really expensive. And then on top of that, you end up on Department of Labor's radar, and nobody wants Department of Labor wage violations on their back, because it opens the door for other issues that may arise, and we definitely want to keep DOL out of our offices. All right. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the laws that are required for employers to follow when they hire their first employee. And I like to call this HR alphabet soup, because to many employers, that's exactly what it looks like. There's acronyms, there's all these long words, and it's all just a bunch of mumbo jumbo to many individuals. But we're going to talk about a few of the HR laws that are required to be followed at first hire. Number 1, the Fair Labor Standards Act. When you hire your very first employee, you are going to be required to follow FLSA. What does that mean? FLSA is under the Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor, and it explains who is and is not eligible for overtime. So we've already talked about that, right? So now you know that when you hire your first person, you're going to have to make sure that you run through the test and determine whether or not they're going to be exempt, which is not eligible for overtime, or whether they're going to be non-exempt, which is they are eligible for overtime. The Equal Pay Act. When you hire someone, let's say you're hiring your second employee, you have one male employee and you have one female employee. Both of them are accountants. They should be paid equally for their level of expertise, their degree, their education, and their amount of experience. If you're paying them significantly different and the man is making significantly more money than the female, you could potentially have a problem on your hand. So you're going to need to make sure that your job description outlines exactly what the qualifications are, and then you're going to need to have justification as to why one person is making more than the other person. This Equal Pay Act goes back to Lilly Ledbetter, which started in the 1960s, believe it or not. I think it was 1968, at Goodyear Tire. And she received all of these accolades and glowing reviews for a few years, and then all of a sudden they stopped. And she found out that over the course of her employment at Goodyear, her male counterparts who were doing the exact same job increasingly received more money than she was for doing the same exact job. So we want to make sure that we have fair pay for the same amount of work that's being completed. The uniform guidelines of employee selection. Remember in the beginning when I talked about discrimination against hiring, firing, promoting, and training? This is what this law is speaking to. You have to make sure that your hiring practices, your termination practices, your training practices, and your promotion practices do not create any type of discrimination within the organization, inadvertently or not, disparate impact or not. You have to make sure that if you're going to hire someone, that you're hiring them for their abilities and not violating any form of discrimination. And that is going to be Title VII discrimination. So gender, religion, any type of protected class under Title VII. USERRA, which is the Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. If you hire military staff, for example, that let's say that they're in either reserves or they're in active duty, USERRA requires that when a person goes out on military duty, that when they return, you're required to reinstate them back into their regular position, unless that position is no longer available, and you'll have to explain why that position is no longer available. That holding it created some type of undue hardship for the company. Then you have to put them into an equivalent position when they return. In addition, you have to make sure that you are not discriminating against veterans in your hiring practices, just in general. So you want to make sure that you're following USERRA when you are in the process of hiring. HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. I'm sure we've all heard of that. This is a big one because there are varying components to HIPAA. As an employer hiring their first employee, you may not necessarily come across HIPAA requirements that you have to have documentation that you maintain, but obviously in the course of employment, you're going to run across health information regarding your employees. You want to make sure that two things. Number one, you're safeguarding that information that you receive, that it's kept locked away separate from their employment file. And secondly, that if they need access to that information, that you are able to provide them with that access. There's an electronic component to this as well. Do employees have access to their records electronically? Can they log in to see information about their health insurance? If that's something that you offer when you get to the point of offering that. And then also, is that electronic information being housed safely? So when you get to the point where you're going to be providing insurance benefits, specifically health insurance benefits, you want to make sure that your broker understands the HIPAA requirements, what their fiduciary responsibility is, and you want to make sure that you maintain that same fiduciary responsibility internally for your employees. And then last on this list, but not last in terms of laws, or last that we're going to talk about in terms of federal laws today, is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which basically explains how you are required to, what you're required to provide employees as it relates to, as it relates to their credit. So if you're going to pull background checks or you're going to pull credit checks, they have rights under that act, and we want to make sure that we're following that. And then, of course, not only do you have federal laws you're following, but you also have state laws that you're following. So state laws may vary slightly. They may have what's called mini, M-I-N-I laws that you have to follow. You want to make sure that if you are in contradiction of state versus federal, that you provide to the employee whichever is the most generous. That is the law that has to be followed in regards to states. So there is a great amount of power in one. You can have one contract, one strategic partnership that could land you lots of dollars for your business. And the flip side of that is you can have one complaint, one violation, one fine, or one audit that could close your business. And we definitely don't want that to happen. So what do you need to do? You need to learn to embrace HR. And I know we're right at almost finishing time. I just need 5 more minutes to get through these last few slides. So I'm going to show you what the 7-step process is for embracing HR. Number 1 is evaluate. 2, measure. 3 is benchmark. 4 is restructure. 5 is assign accountability. 6 is communicate, and 7 is engage. So first, you evaluate. Why do you evaluate? Because you need to determine the areas of your HR infrastructure that are missing. How are you going to know where the holes are if you don't take time to evaluate the process? As an outcome to that, you have a better sense of what areas need to have immediate attention, and you can start to address those specific areas. Secondly, we measure. Why do we need to measure? Because we need to understand the data that we just uncovered through the evaluation process and understand why that information is useful inside of your business. Once you measure, you're now aware of what it is that needs to happen in terms of a next step. Benchmark. You want to measure your data against the market. So you want to take what it is that you now have uncovered when you measured, and you want to take that out to the market and find out what are other people doing? What are other businesses doing? What are businesses that are my size doing or larger? What are businesses that are not in my industry doing, and what are businesses that are in my industry doing? So you want to benchmark all of that data so that you get now relevant data to measure your internal data against. Or you want to restructure. Begin using that tangible, relevant data that was received so that you can start to restructure your internal process based on the information you've evaluated, measured, and benchmarked. Why do we need to do that? The outcome of that is going to give you a new baseline to build from. So now you're made aware, you understand what the data is, and now you have a new baseline that you can start to build from. That's the restructure. Next, you're going to assign accountability. Why do you need to assign accountability? Somebody has to be responsible for setting the expectations. Generally speaking, in a solopreneur environment or a small business, it's probably the owner. But you're going to set the expectations as to who is responsible for doing what inside of your organization. That provides you with not only clarity, but also buy-in. By giving people accountability and assigning accountability to them, it gives them buy-in to that process. If you don't get buy-in on the process, there's 2 things that needs to happen. We need to look at the process and make sure that it really makes sense, or we need to look at who we have in our organization and find people that want to buy into the process that we are establishing. C, we want to communicate this information. I can't tell you how many times organizations go through the process of making changes and they tell no one. They don't document the changes. They don't update their employees. They don't explain what the expectations are. And then employees are frustrated, and the owners and the business owners are equally as frustrated because nothing is happening based on what it is that they had in terms of expectations. You've got to tell people. And the reason you tell them, the outcome that you get from telling them, is you have transparency. Now everybody is on the same page. Everybody understands what the process is. Everybody knows what they are responsible for and what the expectations are. And lastly, you want to not only engage an HR expert to walk you through this process and help to maintain this process as you grow, but you also want to engage your workforce in this process. You want to get feedback from your workforce. Keep your finger on the pulse so that you understand as you make these changes, what's happening inside your workforce that's working, what's happening that's not working, and where do you need to make those adjustments. So it's a constant embrace HR process. You're always evaluating. You should be. You should always be measuring, benchmarking, communicating, assigning accountability, and making sure that your workforce is engaged. This gives you the opportunity to work on your business and not in your business because you have an HR expert that's assisting you. The outcome of that is that you get a legally sound and effective and scalable HR infrastructure to grow with you. So it starts with where you are, and it's scalable to help you get to where you need to go. So how can HR Pro for You help you today? Right now, we are running a limited time offer valid through next Wednesday at 11:59 p.m., where we are offering $150 off an Embrace HR initial assessment. What does that mean? That means that I will walk you through the evaluate and the Embrace HR process for your internal organization and give you recommendations as to what you need to do and how you need to go about doing Embrace HR to help build your HR infrastructure. If you would like to take advantage of that offer, you can use the link that's below, bit.ly/embracehr150. It'll take you right to the registration page on my site, and you can lock in a date and a time to do that. Again, the offer is going to run through next Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. I thank you for your time and indulging me for these 5 extra minutes. I would love to connect with you if we're not already connected on social media. Certainly follow me on Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also email me and keep up on my website. And also feel free to call me. My phone number is listed there. And lastly, what I wanted to let you all know is that coming in January of 2018, I'll be launching a podcast called HR After Dark. And that podcast is going to talk about all of the things that happen in HR that people don't generally talk about. Some of the dark secrets of HR. We'll also talk about breaking headlines that are happening in the world of HR and answer questions that come throughout the course of the month. So it'll be a monthly podcast that's going to launch in January. Thank you again so very much for your time, everyone. If you have questions, please let me know. I can also email the slides to you all if you would like. And I, again, appreciate your time. Look forward to helping you embrace HR. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Bye-bye now.